how can we make this better? Because it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be one great AI god pulling us into some utopian or / dystopian future. It isn't going to be that way.
Hi, this is your project management cowboy coming back to you with the second podcast of a series of podcasts that we're doing on AI. The last podcast we did was kind of me venting and sharing some ideas and some concerns about AI. But I have to honestly say I'm not really the expert. I'm one of those concerned managers out there who wants to adopt AI but has all sorts of questions. And that's why I'm particularly excited with the guest that we have this one, Helen Edwards. She actually is an expert, okay? And I've been looking on social media at a number of different sources, and one of the reasons why she stuck out to me, she's a perfect balance between enthusiasm and excitement about the potential of AI, while at the same time not turning a blind eye to the concerns out there. And what I love about her when she's on Instagram and the other social media, it's just fun to listen to her. What she has to say is profound. I feel like every time I'm listening to her on social media, I learn something new. So without further ado, Helen, welcome on board.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thanks for that great intro.
Yeah, it comes from the heart. For those, I've been admonished several times to not waste time in my podcast with introductions, but I stick to it because I'm adamant about it. I always want to know when I do a podcast or listen to a podcast, I want to know who the person is, because I feel knowing a little bit more about the person gives you a better feeling from what perspective they're coming from. And I also want to do a little bit of advertisement. If I don't invite anybody on my show that I don't wholeheartedly support and find is good. So, you know, you're on social media yourself. You probably have many more followers than I do. But for those who don't know you, do a quick introduction. Who are you?
Cool. Well, I'm Helen Edwards. My husband and I co-founded the Artificiality Institute. Now, we've both been in AI since 2016. I actually started earlier than that in 2012. And we got into AI because we had 5 kids that were approaching college age, and well, the 2 oldest were. And it was that time when the Oxford University report dropped, and it was that first sort of panic that we were all going to lose our jobs to AI. And we had these kids say, well, you know, why should I even go to college? The robot's going to do the job. And, you know, they were being a little bit sort of teenage in that sense, but we didn't have an answer for them. So we decided to do the analysis ourselves. So all of this stuff that you hear about jobs, that most of this data set that's used for analyzing jobs comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the ONET database. And we got into that, got our hands dirty in 2016. And that gave us insight and views into the way that this world would unfold. We have spent the last decade really digging into that more, developing our own ideas. And we recently, sort of a year ago, converted from our more consulting-based work into the Institute, because we wanted to take more of a, public good standing around how we see artificial intelligence changing humans and what it means to be human. And so being a nonprofit makes sense. We are a fledgling research institute. It's just the 2 of us at the moment, but we have very, very strong networks through our community. We have an annual summit that we gather.
I noticed you have a very impressive website, in particular for those people who are desperately looking for like-minded people who are rational but enthusiastic about AI. That's a great source.
And it's an incredible event, and it's 2.5 days of really, it's grounded in the science and the intellectual journey around and the philosophy of AI, but goes all the way through with builders, because that's part of our community, and into design. So that's kind of the arc we have. We really do we try and we are transdisciplinary. We think about, we have cognitive scientists, we have designers, we have neuroscientists, we have computer scientists, we have complexity scientists. We think about this through that complexity lens because we don't think that thinking about this in a reductionist linear terms makes any sense. So our real grounding is, what does it mean to be human with AI? What does it mean to stay human as you use these tools? We are incentivized. We have a natural desire to offload. We will take that deal. We will cognitively offload if we can get the same fidelity. But what counteracts that is our meaning making and our sense making and our sense of purpose to have a life. We are alive, machines are not, and that really does change everything about what we want out of them. So we study that interface. We study the way that people actually use the tools, the way that they describe how it feels, what's happening to their thinking, to their identity, to their sense of what matters, the frameworks they use for sense making and meaning. We study this very much with an eye to how can we make this better? Because it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be one great AI god pulling us into some utopian or / dystopian future. It isn't going to be that way, but we are on the frontier of really advocating for an entirely different mindset and the tools that we need to create what we call cognitive sovereignty, to maintain and build and be able to author your own mind and author your own life as you use this phenomenal technology that is absolutely awesome.
Yeah. And you've just reiterated why I became so enamored with your reels on, I see them mostly on Instagram. I kind of feel that if you listen to some of the people out there, you have two camps. There's probably more, but these are the two that I hear predominantly. One, the psychopathic, sociopathic CEOs of certain AI platforms. I won't mention any names, but you can fill in the Bond villain of your choice, who basically say, hey, you don't have a choice. It's kind of a nihilistic, misanthropic, I think, was it Sam Altman who was asked, or was it Peter Thiel? Well, if AI replaces people, does he have a problem with it? And I think he couldn't respond to the question. It took him 10 minutes to even put a sentence together, right? Which was kind of weird. So you have you kind of have these Bond villain type people who say, hey, don't worry, you don't have a choice, just go with the flow. And then you have some people who are enthusiastic about it as well, but have kind of bought also into this kind of fatalistic kind of perspective. We don't have a choice, we just have to go with it. And what I love about your message is, you embrace the subject, you look for the potential, and there's lots of potential in it. But you say, hey, listen, the focus must be humanistic, and I think that's a great thing. I put together a whole bunch of different questions. I don't think we're going to manage in the time. Maybe I'm going to, if I'm lucky, maybe I'll get you back for a second time. We'll see. But let's start off with some of the questions that I had. You've already mentioned in 2016 you started. It doesn't sound that long ago until you realize it's 2026, and a lot of the things that have been promised still haven't come true. There's this thing that keeps going around in a circle that AI in its original conception is something that goes back to the 70s, actually, which I think
or 50s, yeah.
Or 50s, which fascinates a lot of people. I think there's also discussion.
Well, it goes further if you go back to Frankenstein. I mean, humans have always been quite fascinated by these ideas of creating machines that can do what we do.
I think most people who are aware of or who see AI think it's something that's just been around for the last 2-3 years, in the sense of a life cycle, right? Every product or every technology goes through life cycles. Where do you see the AI situation now? I would assume that we're not as advanced as we think we are. Where do you think we are in relationship to the beginning, and what are some of the maybe next phases we need to prepare ourselves for?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to answer that question. The sort of simplest way is as a technology. where we just say that AI is kind of like any other technology, and we're at, if you like, the C prompt, just the command line, and we haven't got to the GUI. Nowhere near it, right? So that's one frame.
We're not, as far as you're concerned, that would be the relationship where we are in development right now?
Yeah, because this is where our design element, our design side of it comes in. Because what the GUI did was completely fundamentally shift the way that you had this relationship with the machine. And we have not got to that point, right? We are still prompt response, set things up, have them run, come away. It's pretty basic from a design perspective. You can see that there are ideas that people are having about the machine doing the design dynamically. Google's had a couple of demos out on that recently. But the way that we think about that next stage of design is we need an entirely different design philosophy that allows us to really create meaning with these machines, right? They have ideas of their own. You know, I can put the scare quotes around it. I won't. They do have ideas of their own. The science is relatively clear on the way that circuits form in an LLM and the societies of thought that happen inside an LLM quite spontaneously. So an LLM has kind of a mind of its own. We're really early here. It's still inside its own training data. It can't go outside that in the sense of sort of a William James intelligence of being able to handle genuine novelty, whatnot. There's a boundary that's moving and growing. But nevertheless, if you imagine that in not too many years from now, there'll be more people who understand that these LLMs are intelligent. They have ideas. They want to communicate to you. And we don't have any design element for that at the moment. And all we do is get stuck in these arguments about, well, it's not intelligent, it's just a stochastic parrot. Well, it is really intelligent. It's going to take over the world. Now, we're very meta-modern in this. We sit in this middle where we say those two ends of the spectrum just can't be right. There's something in the middle that we need to discover. And design is one way of discovering that. So, yes, we're so early. You can imagine what it will be like when you can move into this more dynamic, relational base with a machine. We have a relation. Yeah. So that's one way of answering it. Another way of answering it is kind of similar. It's even more simple, which is, well, it is simple, that you take patterns from the past where when new technology comes, including when it's threatening, that we have this moment of efficiency where the practitioners who understand the craft will grapple with the tool and make it work within their own workflow. So the one we like to talk about is Final Cut Pro. When that came out, the people who were those editors made it more efficient and put it into their workflow. But it took a few years, non-experts, newer people, up-and-coming innovators to go from efficiency to innovation. And we're definitely seeing this efficiency to innovation shift happening now in some fields, not everywhere. The complicating factor with AI is that there's a question, is this different than any technology we've ever had before? And if so,
and how far do the historical analogies of the railroad and industrialization compare, and what do we have to be?
Across the board, 100% across the board. And the reason that we founded the Institute is because we have this question, is it different? And the research that we do holds that as the core question, because it might be that AI is just the next technology and it rolls out on the patterns of previous technologies. We have cognitive science that tells us that can be the case. The extended mind theory, we've always offloaded to tools, for example. That's one way of thinking about it. The economics creates more jobs than it destroys. They're just different. GDP, up we go with a little bit increase in productivity. You know, sort of 10% would be a massive number, but not thousands and thousands of percents that exist in the abundant, the post-scarcity dialogue. So we hold this position of, is this different? If so, how, and what's the different role for humans? As we're excited by it. We think it's really interesting, but there's a little bit where we could say it's precautionary principle.
Oh, yeah.
Right? What if it's different? It could be really different. We just don't know yet. I don't think we know. I think it is, but I can't prove it.
Yeah, but you can, that's the whole principle. We can go back to Edward Deming, who said, if you don't know what the hell you're doing, you can still do plan, do, check, act. You make an assumption. You don't live by the assumption, because we all know what to assume means.
We test this, and we look, and we want to understand if it's different, how is it different, and what do we do better for humans? Because what is the point of any technology if it's not making us smarter and better and more meaningful lives? What's the point?
You said something in the last statement that triggered my project management brain. Every time somebody says something that I catch that would be an important thing to do, right? You said design would be important. The classical project management question is who, right? Mm-hmm. I thought, are you talking about using design principle thinking or any variation thereof? And I kind of thought back to the old, when the C prompt or the GUI thing. I had to think about how, I remember those old computers that I used to hate, and as soon as I saw an Apple for the first time and it had a GUI, it was like, yay, and that's become the norm. Who do you think is, because I think the industry has gotten into a habit of not asking the end customer. We kind of have the mentality, hey, give them what they don't know what they need. Who from your perspective should be responsible for designing this evolution in AI?
Well, now that's a really interesting question. At this point, it'd be great to have Dave here, because he is the sort of the one who holds the candle on design most. He was at Apple in the early 2000s, and very very strongly influenced by his work with Steve Jobs, and he holds that as a deep, he says, bleeds six colors. The question of who should sort of needs to start with back a little bit to why again, and what else is happening. Because if you look at what's happening to the creative industries, including designers right now, there is a significant squeeze going on in their professional lives, where they aren't being asked to just be designers. They're being asked to be copy editors, and they've been asked to be software developers, and they've been asked to be graphic designers and brand managers and communication specialists. So they're a little bit of a microcosm of how jobs are kind of delaminating. And they're delaminating around the fact that non-experts can now step in and press buttons and do prompts and
vibe
become and vibe code. And that it's vibe coding and vibe designing as of last week with Claude Design. And I think that what we have to, before we answer that specific question, we have to look at a couple of things that are happening at the principled level. And the first one is the way that jobs are starting to change with the fact that everyone can do kind of anything. But
at least at a rudimentary level, yes.
Most people
sometimes
don't know
even
what
at an intermediate level.
Yeah, but most people don't know what they're doing, right? And at the moment, there's a narrative that says that if you, and I was reading a Twitter thread this morning, an X thread this morning, and it was just yet more people saying, essentially, you can give a non-expert an LLM or a design, some sort of AI, and suddenly they can be an expert across all fields because they're going to design, they're just going to run all these agents. And I'm looking at it going, okay, so where's the flaw here? Do you give it to an 18-year-old? Do you give it to a 12-year-old? Do you give it to a 7-year-old? Do you give it to a 5-year-old? Where's the flaw? And it's such a completely absurd argument. And the reason it's absurd is because there's a fundamental thing that happens with AI is that it's all kind of average. And it's average not just because you've got to kind of push if you're a good prompter, you can push the models out of average. There's no secret there. But it's average because the design is average. It's a text, it's a prompt, it's this. So for most people, most of the time, going beyond their expertise will give them something that looks novel to them, but isn't novel to the world. So when it comes to, how do you think about who should design? The answer is every single user is going to be able to design, but who is allowing them to create these new designs? Well, the answer is nobody right now. You still got to go back to the core of the people who understand what design is for and understand what is genuinely novel, what is able to be, what is different and meaningful to a person and to the machine. So when everyone in a company is able to vibe code their own thing, they're all going to vibe code something that looks like a standard SaaS design right now. And we're looking for new people who aren't captured by the standards and the race to beat the next model release. And so that's one of the things that we do. We think about design philosophy that's there for humans. And it's still so early, we can't see that next step yet.
I'm a typical salesperson. If Dave bleeds 6 colors for it and he wants to come on, let him know. I'll give him as much time as he wants, either with you or without you.
He'd be totally wanting to come on and talk about it.
Because I think that's a hot topic, and I'm not going to even go further into it because I think from a holistic perspective, I think there's some other stakeholders that we haven't talked about here, government responsibility and stuff like that. But let me know what Dave thinks and we'll set something up. What I heard, once again, out of what you said is I'm kind of, it triggered a train of thought. And you said there's, I'm almost hearing out of you that AI has still so many limitations because of its rudimentary design that it creates its own deceleration. And if I'm a big fan of Kahneman's book, Think Fast, Think Slow, are you kind of saying that the limitations of AI that we have right now are kind of its saving grace? Because I think most people who are pushing it would love for us to start firing people and just vibe code and AI will do everything, which is ridiculous. But is that kind of what you're saying? Is that the limitations of AI are kind of its saving grace at the same time?
Well, I think the limitations of AI are actually the limitations of people too, right? Because it is hard to legitimately work with AI. It is easy to shove in a couple of prompts and bang, but it's really hard to guide it into the space that it is good at. That is really different than you. So there's a lot of everything from, true slop, which I think is toxic and bad for the world, to AI generated content that doesn't really matter, but people don't like it and it's just kind of lazy, to AI generated content that's really good, that's with the human and is really good, to incredible new discoveries, if you like, and places to go with AI. So we have a structure, and in our research we found sort of 3 things that dominate the way that people use AI, the way that it changes how people work with AI. The first one is blending, how it blends with your thinking and reasoning. Second one is bonding, how it changes your identity, your sense of identity, what you are. And the third one, which is the most important, is bending, which is how your meaning making changes and what you're prepared to try and what you're prepared to do. If you can visualize those 3 in a classic kind of BCG 2x2, but make it a 3x3 because there's 3 of them, and there's high and low dimensions, you can see that there's a cube, right? And at the bottom pole of that cube, that's where you're low on everything and you're putting AI into the role of a doer. You're just getting it to do stuff for you, automate that, go check this, and you're not really thinking that much about it. Doesn't change you at all. But then if you imagine being up in that top right-hand corner when you're high on everything, that's what we call a co-author. You put AI in the role of a co-author. Now, though, if you imagine that as a polarity, there's poles there. Forget about all the other, 6 roles. They're important, but just imagine in your own mind that pole. What you've got there is sort of the showing of what it takes to be really powerful with AI, to use AI really, really well. And you need to understand that dual role before you can step through these other roles to this co-author role. If you get into that co-author role, it is wicked powerful. Like, it is just phenomenal. And the limitation on getting there is a couple of things. One of them is what we've talked about, which is the design of the tools. The other is that we're kind of not very good at doing it as humans, because we want to offload as much cognition as we can if it's efficient and we get the same result. That is a biological imperative. That's how we evolved. That's why this is, a 20-watt light bulb energy, not like the entire Columbia River Gorge of data centers, right? Yeah. And so this is a biological imperative, and we have to act consciously to override that, to escape that biological imperative. And we do that through culture, and we do that through meaning, we do that through that sense of purpose. It's a very social thing. So to really be up in that top corner, you need to have 3 things. You need to have really good awareness, and that's hard, right? You tell people to do that on social media, and it's like that's why we have phone boxes that people have to, and detoxes. It's hard to do. The second one is agency. You've got to be able to choose. That's where the design comes in. Can you choose it? Can you not? Doesn't exist. It's also where corporate mandates come in. You have to use AI, or you're not allowed to use AI. And
I think there's kind of mixed messages. Use it, but don't use anything that we haven't approved, kind of thing. Yeah.
People live with that all the time. And the big one that you referred to, this politics of inevitability, where, it's all going to be AI anyway, so you may as well just roll over. And the third one is accountability, showing up for others. And we're actually kind of bad at all of them. And the tools are designed specifically to erode that third one. There is nothing in these design of these tools that incentivizes you or even vaguely nudges you into showing up for other people. You're just head down, focused on, I've got to prompt my next Claude, whatever it is. You become obsessed. You read about, you talk to some of these developers who literally just can't stop starting another agent, can't stop starting another project in Claude Code or Codex. So this stopping and showing up for others, whether it's putting down what you're doing and stepping out and talking to someone, or whether it's actually just collaborating within the tools. Like, the AI tools do not support collaboration in any meaningful way.
Although I've seen some attempts in that direction with Copilot versions, question mark.
Yeah, but it's pretty awful.
Well, I hear you.
We've got a long way to go, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, good. I'm really looking forward to this next question. I did like a little precursor where I ranted and raved and got on my soapbox and went through some of the classical myths that I picked up and some of the ones that I'd added. We're not going to go through them individually. There's if you want to hear Helen's take on it, listen to her Instagram. She covers most of them. My question that I would ask you, off the top of your head, I'm sure you've been exposed to all the different hypes and myths out there on AI. Which one's your favorite one? Which one still triggers you the most?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I do think it's a myth that AI is going to or has to destroy all jobs. I do think that's a myth. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think that myth is incredibly dangerous, because it's beyond a myth now. It's an actual business case. and so what sparked me to really get into the Instagram and TikTok reels was to try and make this a much more nuanced and a discussion where people can see that it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
That there are many, many different ways to provide AI to help people at work, to expand what we do, to create entirely new ways of working and being and of knowledge and of literally the human pursuit and the human condition, other than just automating our jobs. And this was a myth, a deep myth for a long time, because AI's technology has always created more jobs. But when it became a business case that dominated the narrative was a couple of years ago when one of the VC firms put out a slide that outlined the business case, which was, here's SaaS, and it was like a pie chart. Here's SaaS, it's this big of a bubble, and here's the labor market, the 13 trillion or whatever. And you're not going to make your money back on AI going after this. You're going to make your money on AI going after this. So the entire industry pivoted to focus on automating humans out of work as the return on investment for building AI. Now, that is a catastrophe. It is an absolute disaster. And anyone who doesn't see that, I just don't understand it. And there's so many reasons why it's such a bad idea, not least of which the economy. I don't buy the sort of runaway post-scarcity argument, and I can talk a little bit about that, but that would probably take the rest of the time we have. The important thing about it is that bringing in these components that we understand from the past that have held true for a few hundred years about the way economies work, the way jobs work, the way they change, the way technology changes jobs, that nuanced discussion needed to be put in so that people got some handholds for how to understand this. But the other thing is just sort of the big idea, which is this is not the same intelligence as us. It's just not. And it's another kind of intelligence. So what happens when you have another kind of intelligence that enables you to reach for a different place? Well, everyone gets better. So the human, what we can do now as humans, the radar charts that look like we're being hunted down as that one. Imagine that circle being like this. No one talks about that. I mean, people talk about it in hand-wavy terms like, oh, we're going to cure cancer and we're going to do whatever. But what we're really talking about is what else is on this chart that we can do? And some stuff is really mundane. Like maybe we can, there are many, many problems we can solve that we don't even think are problems yet.
I think you kind of alluded to it in the beginning of the podcast. I think we are victims of our own paradigm of scarcity in the sense that we've become comfortable with what's possible, right? And I find it funny when somebody says, AI is going to replace lawyers, which is an issue for me because my son is studying business law, and he smiles when I tell him this. But if you think about how few people actually get access to a lawyer or get their rights stood up for, this is what we're covering in law right now when we should be covering this. If you look at medical application, I think even if you have good social medicine, in Austria, you sometimes have to wait 3 months before you get an appointment with a specialist. Okay. So I also agree with you. I believe that what we should be focusing on, and we should be stressing it, in fact, is we're looking for, exponential augmentation of capabilities versus the replacement theory. I think that's really a bad way of thinking. And I agree with you. The self-fulfilling prophecy of believing that myth is a dangerous one.
And it smuggles in I mean, both of them are the same myths in a way, because the post-scarcity argument is one where there's some sort of bright line that exists between what humans do now that suddenly, machines are just going to take care of all of that.
Yeah,
and you listen to people in that who are in that world, and they justify it with the idea of, one, the technological miracle of machines, but they also justify it by saying, well, most people on the planet hate their jobs. And that smuggles in a very big assumption, which is, why don't we have better jobs? And they're basically the same, because they essentially say that leaves humans to do something human-y, What are you going to, if you want to go sit on the beach, you go sit on the beach. Working will be optional. These are absurd ideas.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. The concept of what is it, basic wage or something that's given to people. You know what? It's the same people who are nihilistic who are pitching that idea. I'm like, you won't bat an eye if you fire 30,000 people. I don't know who I'm talking about, right? But you're going to say, hey, there should be a basic general wage for everybody. That's not going to happen. So I agree with you. I think that's some mind games that are being played there.
And there's a wonderful, when it comes to sort of thinking about whether this, because if you Google how many people on Earth hate their jobs, you'll get back a Gallup poll or something that says 85% of people are not engaged at work, and it's like, well, that's not the same question for a start.
Yeah.
That swapped an easy question for a hard question, as Danny Kahneman would have said. A hard question for an easy question, as he would have said. But another thing that sort of shaped my thinking about this, and it's kind of amusing, but it's so true, is he's a neurobiologist, I think, from Stanford University. His name's Robert Sapolsky. Years ago, he wrote an absolutely extraordinarily good book called Behave, which is about the biology of humans at their best and worst. It's very foundational in my thinking about how we should think about what it is that we want and how we decide what we want and what we do with our time. And he started, if I'm remembering his story right, because he's incredibly funny. He's a very, very funny person. And he started this work of his by studying baboons in Africa. And he said that baboons are really interesting as a proxy for studying humans in a non-weird way, like, not studying the white educated undergrads. Mm-hmm. You go and study baboons, and here's why: because baboons have figured out how to get all of their calorific needs in like an hour or two a day, which quote leaves them with a lot of room to be assholes to each other. So
at least and
that is what we would do.
We still do it with pretense. Yeah.
And that is what we would do with more time on our hands. Working together, solving problems together is one of the most meaningful things we can do. And too many jobs have stripped away that meaningful component of sitting down. You know this, you're a project manager, right? Sitting down in a meeting together and saying, we got this thing, we don't know how to do this. Well, let's figure this out together. And you get through that. It is so meaningful. It is so satisfying. And this narrative of, well, machines are just going to do that, and we're just going to sit there and go, no, yes. It's not the human condition it's a catastrophe.
Yeah. There's two things I'd like to add to what you said. And I've said this a couple times in front of two other people that I've had on my podcast for AI. And every time I kind of got a very quiet response, kind of like I think I shocked them with my statement. I didn't think my statement was that shocking. I said, I think it's an illusion to think that AI is going to take away our jobs, because what are all those people going to do when they don't have a salary? I said the biggest danger actually for AI, and I'm going to use your vocabulary, is a baboon with a pitchfork. The most dangerous animal in the world is a human being who's irate. I don't foresee that happening. And I think it's also, when we're talking about design, if we go back to that, I think it's really, really important to design AI in such a sense that it serves humanity and not the other way around. I think that's important. Let's talk. You kind of alluded to it a little bit, the business case behind AI. I'm fascinated. I have Karen Howe's book on my desk. I haven't started reading it. She's fairly adamant about some of the things she says. I kind of, in my role as a consultant, am kind of also the CEO whisperer. One of my roles is often to sit in board meetings and when everybody else is confused, ask the stupid questions that nobody dares to ask. I'm kind of that odd man out. I'm allowed to ask the stupid questions, and everybody's happy that I do. But I also know how a lot of these people think, and I know that their two pain points are: I have to have a vision, but I don't have any clue. Right. And the other thing is I'm fiscally responsible. OK, my performance is measured on an annual basis. So net present value is the golden calf that I bow down to. Right. Value delivery is what I'm focused on. And I think all CEOs and executives have this kind of this business case, this Shark Tank pitch model where you can emotionalize me to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, I want to hear numbers. And I don't have the depth and the true access to be able to verify and validate some of the information I get, but some of the stuff that's out there that talks about the business case scares the EBGBs out of me. If I look at the amount of money it takes to invest into data centers and all this stuff, we're talking about trillions, but the revenue model is in the billions. I don't know if it's 10% or less than 10% return. What's your take on that whole conversation? Where do we stand? I saw on Instagram a guy who was very convinced of what he was saying. I don't know who he was, but he said, in 3 to 5 years' time, half of these companies won't exist because they won't be able to overcome that initial stage of having to satisfy their investors, and investors will turn their back. I don't know if that's being too Cassandra-like in their perspective. What's your take on the business case and what needs to happen? I think also there's the MIT report that says of the 100% of companies that have invested in that AI, only 5% claim to get a return of investment on their investment. What's your take on that?
Okay, so a lot going on there. First of all, I want to start with where you started, which is the executives who need a vision and don't know how to have a vision. And you also mentioned about the short-termism, if you like, of the NPV in a year. Well, here it's a quarter. So, it's just like, there's a lot to say there, right? So, but let's just start with that. Why is it so hard to have a vision right now? One of the reasons is because the narrative is exactly as we've talked about, this utopia, dystopia kind of thing. I think any sensible executive doesn't believe that narrative, doesn't see how we could get to some sort of utopian UBI, blah, blah, whatever it is. They don't see a path to it because of our political situations and the reality of where we are right now. So they entertain the conversation because they don't have anything to push back on. They don't have their own vision of this. And there's a good reason why they don't have their own vision of this. And but they feel like they're stuck having to join a cult, and they don't want to join a cult. So how do you get that vision? And that's linked to how do you create an ROI for a longer term view? There's two answers to that. One is that creating a vision requires understanding whether this is different or not, whether AI is different as a technology. Now, I think it's going to be different because I think it's landing in our society at a particular moment at the end of the Great Acceleration. So you're probably familiar with the idea of the Great Acceleration, where you got all those charts going up and exponential, right? Now, we know that nothing continues exponential forever. what happens is you jump onto another curve, another exponential curve, and you sort of start again. Now, I think we're at that point. Now, that by definition means that the entire organizational structure changes, of the economy, of society, changes. And by definition, you've got no idea from within it what it's going to look like. So creating this vision is really, really hard for them. Now, we help people do that in a way they can create a vision that allows them to see some of these early indicators of what this phase shift might look like. So that's kind of one thing. The second thing is about the people themselves and the ROI on the people. And if you just accept the big tech proposition of it's all going to be automated, it's all going to go away, you've got a company of 100,000 employees now. That's going to go down to 1,000 employees that operate 1 million agents in doer role, right? Think about back to my 3 things. They're down there in the doer role, a handful of humans replacing all the hundreds of thousands that used to be there, and they're just going to hit the button for yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Now, 2 problems with that. One is, who's AI? Your entire competitive advantage was based on your people, which you've switched out for machines that your competitors are also using. That just makes no sense. You've just eroded all your competitive advantage, and you've bought into the idea that what you're hoping for is this quote-unquote mythical, slightly undefined AGI. Remember that AGI, artificial and general intelligence, has been redefined recently to mean a machine that can replace a human because it doesn't make the same mistakes as the AI we have today. It doesn't hallucinate, essentially. So you can replace your lawyer, your whatever it is, with this AI. But this is just whose AGI? And so then it circles back to where you get to, which is with one of the other questions that was nested in that initial question, is this a bubble? And I don't think it's a bubble because this compute is now going to be everything. We will organize around compute in some sort of way. So I don't think it's a bubble per se in terms of how we use compute. Whether investors get their money back, that's not necessarily whether we're using compute. It's about what investors think. Are they patient enough to wait for that compute to be used at a price that they're going to get their money back on? That's when this AGI argument comes in, because AGI has always been just this little bit ahead of us, and now it's like, I don't know, some people say it's already happened. Some people say it's next year. Some people say it's 2030. Some people say it's never going to happen. It's because we're all arguing about different distinctions. But if we just focus here on how it's about replacing a human, that's the current definition, in reality is the current definition, then it says, oh, okay, so you've got rid of, instead of having that 100,000 people, you've got rid of 50,000 of them, and you're kind of muddling on through. You're not doing anything new. You haven't really created, and you've got no new products, no new service. You don't really know where you're going, and you're waiting to fire those last 40,000 so you can get down to, or 49,000 so you can get down to the 1,000. Oh, well, you'll just have to wait. You'll just have to be patient. We're nearly there with AGI. And so that, to me, is where this becomes quite a dangerous conversation, because leaders are in a position where they don't have their own vision. They suddenly get, their patience gets captured, and so does the investors. And that's why I think it's so important for leaders to actually understand where we're at so they can create their own vision, and they can have they can design their organizations so that the people that are in them become co-authors. You know, they go further to the top of the cube. They're using AI in really exploratory ways to create new products, new services, new value, rather than just sit and wait passively for everyone in their organization to be a doer with a million agents. Does that make sense? That's kind of my long story.
It does make a lot of sense. I'm going to come back to the vision because it's one of my biggest things that I love to do. I'm a big fan of, I help companies facilitate vision. And I always say the problem with these two brains that you have to have as an executive is one is very quantitative and very rational, and the other one is almost esoteric. Right, and it's kind of counter.
Well, it's value based, and it can be very ephemeral.
Yeah, and the other thing about vision, and this is how I explain vision. Vision is acknowledging that you don't know what the hell you're talking about. In a lot of cases, you don't know what the future is. Okay, but something within you have this fortitude within you. And that's why I'm a big fan of first principles, is to resort back. And when you're talking about humanism, is that tools need to serve human beings. If you start there and ask yourself, and this principle of self-determination, okay, I know the basic functions and features of AI. What do I want my AI to do? What is the beautiful future that I envision? That's where you need to start with a vision. And and one thing I continually, and you said that CEOs don't want to be part of a cult. I kind of feel that a lot of them are kind of run along with, I think they, for decades, everybody was talking about how shareholder value was so important. I always thought shareholder value was a terrible KPI, right? But everybody bought into it, and firing people is also on the Harvard Business School checklist of how to improve your P&L when things look bad. But it's a stupid.
We're seeing a lot of that right now.
Yeah, it's a stupid principle, and I think the reason why people. And I think the return of investment conversation is an important one because it's valid to a certain extent. But the way to overcome it is if the only solution you have is I'm going to fire 30,000 people, then you don't have a vision. I absolutely agree with you. And the other thing that I wrote down a second time already, the old rule for tools. One of the rules for tools: a fool with a tool is still a fool. So that's kind of. I have a weird.
Well, and it's worse now because you get dumber.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another thing. I wrote down something that I thought it was funny. A funny idea that came up, and you have a whole in your Instagram. You talk about stochastic parrots and intelligence, and we need to be a little bit differentiated and not be so judgmental of it, and be a little bit more open for it. Which I'm also trying to do. But one of the things I thought about, if employees really don't like their job. Or aren't motivated to do. My weird question is, when AI becomes so self-aware and so intelligent, why the hell would it even want to work for us?
Well, now you're into the philosophy.
Right?
So I think what you said something really important just before about self-determination. And that self-determination is so fundamental to us as humans, right? And why do we have that? Well, because otherwise we're just kind of far too vulnerable. There's sort of a peak vulnerability where it's about courage, the Brene Brown story of vulnerability. But there's also like true vulnerability where you're going to die. Yeah. So self-determination comes from how we, make meaning in an uncertain world. With the umwelt that we have, and I do wonder about how a machine will see that in us. And one of the we are both Dave and I are visiting researchers at University of Berkeley CHAI Center for Human Compatible AI, which is Stuart Russell's lab, very focused on how do you make AI that does what humans want to do and want it to do.
Especially once it realizes that it's more intelligent than we are.
It's a devil of a problem.
Yeah.
Well, it's faster and it can see different things, sure, and that might be enough, right? But how do you it turns out that designing that is a very, very difficult problem. And there's even been times that I've been sitting in meetings there where there's an element of doubt, which means humility about whether it's possible. So humans, why would a machine want to work for us? a machine would want to work for us because it is designed to want to work for us.
But that's also a form of self-determination. We impose our will through whatever means that might be, through default, through coaxing, whatever the approach might be. Yeah.
So I think that it's, if you go to the sort of the Nick Bostrom version of the philosophy, you wouldn't ever think that a machine would want to work for us, because you'll be thinking it's an optimizing machine that's optimizing. Even if it tries to optimize for something we want, it will be hijacked by one of its sub-goals. Humans don't do that. We tend not to be hijacked by sub-goals. We're a bit more nuanced. So I always struggle with those kinds of philosophical projections, because I think if it's so smart, then why can't it figure out other ways of resolving that question for itself? Because it never becomes a question of, I want to work for a human, yes, no. No intelligence really works on such a binary position. It's like, well, why? And why would I not? And is that human asking me to do something that's a really bad idea? Is it a bad idea for them? Is it a bad idea for their friends? Is it a bad idea for society overall? Is it a bad idea for me? Is it a bad idea for their future selves versus their current selves? There are suddenly so many things that happen. And I go to Ruth Chang's work as a philosopher here, where it's the reason that hard choices are hard is because there's no apples to apples comparison. There's no true way to score them.
Isn't that what makes it worth living?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so self-determination comes in. We make a decision about something, and then we backfill it, if you like. We make it a good decision.
Yeah. I would add to what you were talking about when it comes to self-determination, just seeing the way things are. I think, actually seeing the way things are gives you, and if you're creative, gives you options of how to shape. I often say, I'm a big fan when I coach people. I say, you know what? A lot of people are more caught up in fear, and they let fear paralyze them. And then
we know that fear narrows our attention.
Yeah,
and so we can't go back out. And I think, if it's interesting watching this sort of shift in dial and shift in vibe that's coming out of the Valley right now, that it's like how that Citrione thing dropped and everyone went, oh my God, you mean if no one's paid any money, we're going to tank the economy? And everyone suddenly got surprised. It's like, oh, for goodness sake, is that how? I mean, that's basically what an economy is. It's trade. And this one's like, oh, if we keep talking about how we're going to destroy humanity, maybe people won't like that. Maybe we need to talk about it in a different way. And I think this shift that's happened in just communication strategies just in the last couple of weeks just tells you how insulated a lot of people in the Valley are. They've been talking to their investors, they've been talking to their potential investors, talking to the street, and then they suddenly realize, oh, maybe a backlash isn't a great idea. Maybe we can't wash that away with big super PAC donations and whatnot. And I think it's showing that humans like us, just regular everyday people who aren't rich and aren't paid by tech companies, that when we get together and we talk about this stuff and we have self-determination kind of conversations, not, oh my, there's nothing I can do, I've lost hope. When you have hope and when you have a sense of agency, we can stand up and we can demand a different answer. And I think we're seeing the start of that. That's very much what our summit is about. We started that 2 years ago. The first one was about hope, because hope is an act of rebellion.
When does it take place? Are you having one this year?
22nd to 24th of October in Bend, Oregon. 2.5 days, all meals and whatnot included. It's very intense. What's that, sorry?
Are there still tickets to be had?
Yes, there are still tickets to be had.
Okay. Do you do anything in Europe because that's my neck of the woods? Anybody over?
We are working on something in Europe next year.
Okay.
We are in Athens at the beginning of May.
Okay.
For the World Beautiful Business Forum, and that has sold out. But we're running an AI and Democracy marathon there. So we're starting with a funeral for human democracy, and we're having 42 hours and 42 kilometers of amazing programs about AI and democracy, which is part of the World Beautiful Business Forum.
I knew that I was not going to come close to getting to all of the questions that I had on my list, but maybe that's an excuse to hit you up for a second session. And definitely reach out to Dave. I meant that serious. I'd love to talk.
No,
talk to him
he'll
about
be delighted.
The design thing.
He really wants to be talking more about this.
I would have. I want to summarize a little bit of what you said, and then lead into my last question, because I know that you have to go. So I think the two states that I think we're trying to point out is, if you're an executive who has to make decisions, what we don't want somebody who's despondent and basically just gives in and is kind of fatalistic and says, I just have to go with the flow. I actually think I would agree with you that I think a lot of them don't believe the hype that is out there. And I think actually, and I don't think most of them would admit it, a lot of them are paying lip service. When I read some of these white papers, I'm like, oh my God, I
think they feel they have to. Yeah. Which is again this politics of inevitability. They have to, and it's been presented as honestly, it's been presented as a done deal.
Yeah, you don't have a choice.
Yeah, and it's been presented as this is the only way this can go. Yeah. And I don't know whether these are myths. I think they have good philosophical grounding, and there is some, obviously, empirical evidence starting to come in about recursive self-improvement and intelligence explosion and whatnot. Yeah. But an intelligence explosion doesn't mean that everything explodes at once. Yeah. Now, what you can do in software is fundamentally different than what you can do in a power grid that you have to build, in minerals that you have to mine, which means geology. We're missing so much just reality that, and I think it's interesting that you're having a similar experience with leaders, because when you say to them, you don't have to believe this, they go, oh, thank God for that.
Like at a coffee break, they'll nod at you. So, yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, we've seen this pattern. I mean, this is the power of narrative, right? This is where Yuval Noah Harari would say, hey, well, this is a story. And this is exactly why I started doing these reels, because I started to worry that this story is becoming causal. Yeah. That it's creating this outcome.
Yeah, it's creating a perception that leads to a fait accompli. But what I like about what you're saying is we're on the same team in the sense that we have a more self-deterministic, a more creative, a more design thinking sort of, that we can shape the future. It's not over till the fat lady sings. But I do have one final question. Maybe we can squeeze it in the 5 minutes.
It's okay. I got a note where we're good to go for another 20 minutes.
Okay, good. And this is also a kind of a play on, as my original education is in marketing. I rarely had a formal marketing position. I usually used marketing in my product management, in my project management, in my coaching and training and consulting. Because it's part of the integration thing, I think it's really, really important to have an understanding of who your client is, what your product is, and stuff like that. And in marketing, we learned that classical adoption curve that I'm sure you're familiar with, right? You have the first mover, which is 1 to 3%. I think it's even lower than that in reality. Usually, you have to give away your product and hope that they're a good reference, and then there's usually a gap, and then you have the people who follow and stuff like that. I think that those who don't dare to have a vision, I think maybe we can build a slogan around that. I think a lot of them are sitting it out. And my question to you, I wouldn't maybe appeal that they should sit it out completely. I think they need to put their feet in the water and get it wet. But do you see that maybe a competitive advantage would be not to be the first mover on the big AI initiatives, do something in AI, but be a second mover when we get enough feedback from those who failed, so that we can move forward? Do you think that's a competitive advantage that one could advise executives of, or do you think that's short-sighted?
No. Well. What I think is that we're looking at the wrong curve, right? So the curve is always about AI adoption, like have you used ChatGPT today or whatever. But the curve that matters is, and anyone who's been through a digital transformation knows this, it's about the people. Yeah. And it's even more about the people this time, because this is a cognitive technology. It does thinking for you. It really does do thinking for you. And so what you've got to do is start with the people. So you start with how the people, how their bonding, blending, and bending is happening, and you give them tools that are totally tool agnostic, that you give them mindsets, and you give them the awareness and the agency and the accountability. Because where we see adoption, quote unquote, stalling out and not getting an ROI, we see it because people worry about what it's doing to their thinking.
Oh, and there's some serious studies. Also, what it does to the prefrontal cortex. I think there's studies on it. Yeah, and
they're early. And if you read those studies, you read the methodology. The researchers are very, very careful to put all the right caveats in. So it doesn't have to make you dumber. Obviously, it can make you a co-author. It can make you a lot smarter. That's the whole point. Is what we've been talking about for the last hour and a bit. But it really is all about how the humans learn what it means for them to be human with these tools, which is why our education programs are completely different than here's how to use the tool. It's here's who you are when you use this tool. You're a co-author, you're a framer, you're a catalyst, you're a doer, whatever. The other thing that I think is really important to sort of keep in mind about these sort of adoption, fast follower type ideas is that we're being constrained by how people learn to bring these machine employees, if you like. We've talked about machine employees for 10 years. Bring these machine employees into the collective. That one of the lenses that we bring to this whole discussion is from the science of collective intelligence, the field of collective intelligence. And when you're deeply immersed in the field of collective intelligence, you realize that it's all collective intelligence. There is no such thing as an individual. There is no place.
The intellectual ether, I think, is what some authors call it, yeah.
Some people call it that. And the scholars of collective intelligence have math around this. It's very clear that you cannot draw a bright line around an individual. Your mind, my mind, I got so much knowledge from your mind in the last hour and I have no idea what it is anymore. It's just my knowledge now. And when you get to that collective intelligence, you realize, and as this is something leaders need to understand, is these tools divide people into individuals, and that's an illusion. And when people come together to try and solve a problem, what they've really lost is the ability to work together. A lot of what we do in our work, and we call it the inside view, will come in and we essentially, I hate the word audit because it's an awful word, but we essentially audit the organization for where people are sitting in this cube, how it's changing their thinking and meaning making. And then we put it together in a way that leaders can see whether their people are still solving problems together and whether they're building collective intelligence or whether they're building a bunch of individuals that, by the way, when you follow the laws of capitalism say you get to switch those individuals out for other individuals. By the way, those individuals can switch themselves out. They can go to your competitors. They can go and be a competitor. They can take everything they've ever known and vibe code the alternative to your software product and sell it at 1% of the price you're selling.
There's such a magnitude of opportunity because from a customer relations perspective, I still think that we are in the Stone Ages when it comes to customer service. Most companies are.
Well, try medical insurance.
Yeah. Are you familiar with
changing
the Little
a flight
Britain?
when there's no fuel in Europe for a flight?
Yeah, are you familiar with the Little Britain sketch? I keep using this in reference to AI. You know, where he's sitting there as a lady tipping into the computer and his computer says no.
I'm very familiar with Little Britain. It's not very. You never see it in the US. It's not. It broke political correctness before anything else did. But it was very popular in New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah. How much time we still got?
I'm good for another 15.
Okay, very good. Then I'm going to squeeze whatever I can out of those 15 minutes. You've kind of talked about capitalism, but I think I'll save that for another time. Let me ask you another branch of topic here. And I don't know how well crafted this question is, but it should trigger. Can AI and democracy coincide?
I think it has to. And I think there's real reason for hope. We've worked on that because it is a collective intelligence thing. And there's no accident that one of the great scholars of collective intelligence is also an AI and democracy person, and is also a democracy person, is also an civic institutional person. That's Sir Jeff Mulgan, University College London. I did an Instagram live with him last week, and that's on our YouTube channel. There's no accident. It's no accident that the collective intelligence project is also a democracy project. Where I'm at, and I'm hoping that I learn an enormous amount in Athens. I'm sure I will. It's a very vibrant group with the House of Beautiful Business. But where I'm at is that democracy is definitely under threat. It's backtracked a lot in the last few years.
But that's not only AI. There's a number of different things.
Nothing to see here. We know that. We know. But there's a golden rule of AI. And a golden rule of AI is that it amplifies whatever system you put it into. So it's going to amplify the problems we have. So those of us who believe in democracy, which I think is most of us that have experienced the benefit of democracy, and Sir Jeff will tell you that autocracies might look good for a while because suddenly it looks like people can make decisions.
Well, you usually want it when you're in fear.
Keeps the trains on time sort of thing. But then they make big, big mistakes. And that if you live in an autocracy, you're more likely to die. You're more likely to
taken advantage of, be disenfranchised.
All sorts of awful things. So we have to go back to the fact that democracy, when I talked to him last week, he said democracy needs to be cherished. And it needs to recognize that it requires people to care for each other. And there's this pre-existing condition, which is, he even said, we need people to love each other for democracy to work. And I thought, wow, that's wonderful to hear, because it's a word that in business people will shy away from. And choking up thinking about it. And the reason that we got to that point at the end of the conversation is we got to what we're seeing with these real experiments where AI is being used to help people listen to each other again, to help people build back the muscle memory that is required to take into account someone else's perspective and to literally walk in their shoes for a minute. Not a mile anymore, because we can't do it. Our attention spans are too short. But the experiments are very compelling and they're very hopeful that AI has this ability to help us translate. And we've used this functionality all the time at work, right? You know, take this email and tell me what's in it. Summarize this paper for me. Tell me, write this form, explain this to me as though I'm a 16-year-old. Explain this to me as though I've got a PhD. All of those translation mechanisms that the transformer architecture does so well, does really, really well in this world of democracy. So like I said, we're starting with a funeral for human democracy because we don't think alone anymore. We think with technology. We always, democracy's been affected by technology.
So you're not being nihilistic. You're being maybe hyperbolic a little bit, but you're trying to.
Well, there's a little bit of. We like to. We want to be a little bit.
That's what catches people's attention. I'm with you.
Well, and if you look at how the House of Beautiful Businesses has formed its agendas its programs over the last 10 years. There's plenty of those kinds of things where you go,
absolutely.
Right, I'm curious now. I really want to understand what they mean.
We need an emotional touch to it. You're as a marketing person, you appeal to me. One other thing, I don't know if you're familiar with when you were talking about the love factor, you trigger something. One of my favorite books that I've been pushing for a long time. I've tried to have them on my podcast, but I'm not important enough yet. I don't know if you're familiar with Tim Sanders in his book, Love is the Killer App.
I've heard the title of the book, but no, I haven't read it.
It's a very simply written book, but it brings it to the point, and he basically talks about what are some of his first principles and what made him successful. And one of the underlying things he says that guides everything that he does is he loves people. And everything and his vision of how to go from the strategy to the tactics to the day-to-day operations is motivated. So I think that's a great book that I always recommend. I think if I were to summarize what your answer was on democracy, and it kind of matches what we talked about when we were talking about executives. I think we're coming back to you have to have courage to have vision. You have to have a self-deterministic mentality, right? And design is important. I would agree with you. I think there's a number of different technologies out there that could have revolutionized democracy. And I'm a big fan. I believe in democracy. It's the best, worst system that we ever came up with. There's nothing better than it, but it has its drawbacks. I think of an example of Facebook. If I would have had anything to say in Facebook, I would have made it a vehicle of democracy. Okay? With a number of different apps, instead of making it a tool of division, which it's often being used to, because we use, greed as the number one motivator to decide what we're going to do with it.
Because Facebook is not a democratic organization.
But I'm telling you, with a few touches, you could make Facebook a vehicle for democracy. I believe so. I don't think I can convince Zuckerberg of it, but that ship has sailed. But I agree with it. I think, and maybe you can say what your opinion is. What active roles should government be actively involved in? What should their role be?
Well, big question. I'm going to start to answer it based on sort of the institutions of government before getting to, governance, if you like, governance. The institutions that we have were built for a different time. They were built for a different phase, literally phase change, the post-World War II pact, if you like, the consensus. And those institutions have become pretty sclerotic, and they're not working for people. I don't think there's anything controversial to say.
Well, I think they've been corrupted.
Recently, much more so, right? But I don't think they were corrupted in the 80s.
No.
But, and of course, that's a whole bunch of massive generalizations.
Yeah.
But, and so I think that you've got that layer of what does it mean to build an institution for the 21st century? It has to be more agile. I've seen people say, well, let's just make it so that it's like agile software development. Well, some of that is meaningful. A lot of it's not. We need a lot of imagination. And if you think about, this is something that that Jeff spoke about, Sir Jeff spoke about at our summit last year, and it really stuck with me, that, and he did this little exercise, and it's really interesting. If you ask people to imagine different institutions, and in the same way as you would ask someone to say, let's imagine a new product. We're trying to do a new cookie to market, or we're trying to do a new service. We're going to do a new software service. Within 10 minutes, you could instantly get those people go bang, 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 bang. It needs to be these things, right? Our muscle memory for product and service innovation is pretty good. Like we're practiced. If you ask them to imagine a new institution for the public benefit or a public service or a civic good, they get nowhere. Like nowhere. We literally do not value innovating in our institutions. All we do is value layering more and more bureaucracy on top of things. And every now and again, we have a bit of a clean out, but those clean outs tend to be more destructive than they are constructive. This is a challenge. And I think this idea that's so important for democracy is we actually need to start with what does an institution for the 21st century look like? Because that means it's an AI-driven institution. It's an AI-enabled, it's an AI whatever. It's an AI augmented. It's not about replacing people. It's all the same things we've been talking about. Governance, trickier, right? This is not my area of expertise at all, so I'm not going to say much on it. But governance, people design governance to do specific things, and they spend an enormous amount of time thinking about, well, if this happened and then that happened and then what happened and how are we going to represent the people and da-da-da-da-da. And so Jeff pointed out when I did this Instagram Live with him that, the actual governance structures are hundreds of years old. And the US is coming up on 250, and it relied on someone having to get on a horse and travel to represent. And we haven't stepped back and reimagined the governance either. And I think that is the real challenge. That's the really hard one, because I don't want to send my AI to vote for me. But what if I had like 1,000 AIs that were voting on all sorts of things for me instead of one general election every 4 years?
That's what I was talking about on Facebook, is actually why I agree with you. Technology is here. Why aren't we voting real time? Why? A lot of people would object to this. I believe that the masses, if you inform them and you don't serve them slop and you don't manipulate them and you don't, expose them to propaganda, I think that as stupid as the higher ups might think the masses are, I think there's plenty of proof that the masses will make the right decision when given the right information. So once again, I think it's a question of how we use the technology, whether it's
wisdom of the crowds. Yeah, it always is. I totally, I think this is going to be one of the most important discussions for the next decade.
Yeah. Helen, I have to unfortunately look at the time. I know that you've got to move on. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm thrilled that I have you on my podcast. Tell Dave I'm looking out for him, and maybe we can find an opportunity.
I will definitely get you guys in contact.
Yeah, and anytime you have anything, any new insights that you want to share, let me know. You're always welcome to come back. Okay.
Well, wonderful, and thanks for inviting me on. And people can find me on Instagram and on YouTube. We have a newsletter. There's all sorts of things. But if good first stop is where you found me on Instagram.
No, I'm an avid watcher, and I love to see your stuff. Thanks so much, Helen.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. And you have a good rest of your week.
Yeah, you too.